It's another foggy summer day out here in the Redwood Forest, and today we're taking a look at the least expensive midsize truck in America and one of the best midsize trucks. It is the 2025 Nissan Frontier. The observant among you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, isn't the Tacoma's MSRP a little bit lower? And you would be correct. However, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that every Nissan Frontier going off the dealer lot is going to have much more of a discount on the hood than that Tacoma, dropping the actual transaction price lower than Toyota's midsize truck. My local dealer, as a matter of fact, has between $1,000 and $4,000 off the hood of every single Nissan Frontier on the lot without asking, and you can always haggle a little bit lower. On that Tacoma, you're probably going to be paying right at MSRP. And that means, in the real world, this is the least expensive midsize truck in America. Now that Nissan has finally decided to cross the Titan off the corporate ledger, they sharpened that same pencil and pointed it straight at the Frontier. And that makes a lot of sense because the Titan never gained traction here, whereas the Frontier is playing in the fastest growing truck segment in North America. And for 2025, they've given it some important changes. We get the refreshed looks that you see up front. We are driving this very orange PRO-4X trim today, which gets the most aggressive looking bumper and grille treatment. Full LED headlights here, LED fog lights below. But we also see some important changes on the inside with bigger screens available than we had before. And importantly, we get more payload and more towing capacity. A decent number of the Frontier trims will now tow over 7,000 pounds. And even the lower towing models will actually only be a little bit below that 7,000 pound mark. So more towing capacity than we find in the Tacoma. But importantly, we also have a naturally aspirated V6 engine under the hood. This is one of only 3 mid-sized trucks with a regular old V6 living under there, and one of only 2 body-on-frame trucks, and one of only 2 trucks that will tow about 7,000 pounds with a V6 under the hood. If you like the appearance package on the PRO-4X, including the orange Nissan logo, but you don't need skid plates or four-wheel drive, you can get the PRO-X trim, which thankfully will still have these orange recovery hooks below, because you're probably going to need them when you get stuck in that rear-wheel drive model. Thankfully, the PRO-4X is more than just a styling package. We get all-terrain tires, admittedly not the most aggressive tire, but still a nice touch from the factory. We get upgraded dampers, and we get a locker in the back. You'll notice we don't have dedicated recovery hooks in the rear, so you're just going to use that hitch receiver right there for recovery if you need to, but the PRO-4X does get this big black trim piece that connects the taillights one side to the other. These are full LEDs, but we have red turn signals, not amber turn signals in the rear. 2-inch hitch receiver there, 4 and 7-pin wiring harness connection right there in the middle, and then a nice high-mounted backup camera to make it easier to connect your trailer. Like the Tacoma, but unlike most of the competition, Nissan is still offering 2 cabs and 2 beds in the Frontier. You can get a king cab with a 6-foot bed, that's the smaller cab, or you can get this 4-door crew cab with either a 6 or a 5-foot bed in the back. Well, 4'9", because the bed's not quite 5 feet long in that model. It's 59.5 inches. Most of these are going to be 210 inches long. That would be either the king cab with the 6-foot bed or this crew cab with the 5-foot bed behind. If you want the 6-foot bed, that stretches it out to 224 inches long, which is incidentally longer than the shortest half-ton trucks in America. So really, again, about the same size as trucks used to be. The big difference is, once upon a time, 2-door trucks were incredibly popular in North America. Then customers really started demanding 4 doors in the back, and there's really no secret where those 8-foot beds got deleted from. It's because they wanted extra doors in the back and a slightly smaller bed behind. But you could still put 4x8 sheet goods back here if you drop the tailgate. You just won't be putting that plywood between the wheel wells because that dimension is 44.5 inches. The opening back there, that's 54 inches wide, so no problem putting them on top of the wheel wells, but there are no carve-outs or anything like that in these wheel well structures to put 2x4s or 2x6s there like we find in the competition to help you layer that cargo in the back to better accommodate some of those larger items. In case you're wondering, if you redock the tether onto the latch for the tailgate, it does raise that up, but it doesn't make it quite level with the wheel well, although I think it's close enough for me. Back here we have some nice available touches like an onboard inverter port, although this is only good for 400 watts. I would like to see 1,000 watts as a minimum. There's some additional cargo tie downs here, available cargo rails, and that cargo rail goes right up here to the front of the bed. That's a handy location because I do find myself wanting to strap things to the front, and a lot of trucks don't take that into account, only giving you cargo rails on the side. Because beds have been shrinking, we're starting to see more manufacturers giving us cargo tie downs on the tailgate itself, but We don't find that at this moment in the Frontier. If you're a fan of spare tires, Nissan has you covered. There is a full-size spare tire just there under the cargo bed. The Frontier doesn't just get one of the few naturally aspirated V6 engines in this segment, it also gets the newest, the biggest, and the most powerful engine. It's a 3.8-liter V6 producing 310 horsepower, 281 pound-feet of torque, and this is standard in every model. That's definitely different than the Tacoma, which only gives you 228 horsepower in the base trim. This engine features direct injection, variable valve timing, and variable valve lift, so it is a thoroughly modern 3.8-liter V6. It is interestingly mated to a Mercedes-designed 9-speed automatic transmission, so if you're worried about Jatco or that old 7-speed that was still kicking around in models not too long ago, fear not, this is a brand new transmission design. And thanks to the Mercedes connection, it shifts really smoothly, really quickly, and importantly, it has a really aggressive first gear ratio, giving you just over 20-to-1 mechanical advantage. That means high towing capacity and decent performance. If you get the King Cab model, rear-wheel drive of course, you can tow 7,150 pounds maximum. The Crew Cab tops out at 7,040 pounds, goes all the way down to 6,310 pounds if you get the long wheelbase Pro-4X. This short wheelbase Pro-4X is a little bit higher, and most trims will be somewhere between 6,800 and 6,900 pounds of towing capability. While not absolute best in class, this is certainly well above average when it comes to towing, especially in the upper end trims, where we see decent reductions in a lot of the competition. And if you're towing heavier weights in a mountainous area like I live in, you definitely want the larger displacement naturally aspirated engine, because this is simply going to be better at keeping a 7,000-pound trailer under control when you're going downhill than really most of the trucks in this segment. The downside is fuel economy. Bigger displacement, logically higher fuel consumption. This one is rated for 19 miles per gallon in most four-wheel drive trims, 21 miles per gallon in most rear-wheel drive trims, and of course there's a bit of a sacrifice for the Pro-4X, so this one is a little bit lower. Considering that high tow rating, it's weird to me that Nissan doesn't give us an integrated trailer brake controller. You can get one from your dealer and have them install it, or you can do it yourself, but there isn't one from the factory. Moving on to the inside, front seat comfort didn't really change for 2025. We still have a two-way adjustable lumbar support. I'd love to see four-way lumbar. And taller people that I had in here during this week noticed that they felt like the front seat should move a little further rearward. Actual legroom is pretty similar to the Toyota Tacoma. Actually, dimensionally, the cab is very similar to that Tacoma. On the comfort front, though, we do see one change, which is a telescopic steering column in every trim, something that I know a lot of folks are really going to appreciate, because I did find that the steering wheel was a little too close in for me before, especially if you are sitting a little bit further rearward. The design of the front passenger seat is similar, but it lacks the two-way lumbar support and it doesn't adjust for height. Combined legroom in the Frontier is almost identical to the Tacoma, and relative comfort is pretty much the same as well. I have a few inches of legroom left with the front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. The rear seat back is very vertical, certainly more vertical than the average half-ton truck, making the rear seats a little bit less comfortable. You'll also notice the floorboards are a little bit higher, so there's definitely less thigh support for adults. But the bench, it's pretty wide, so you could put three of me back here relatively comfortably. Although, behind a taller passenger up front, this seat is all the way back in its tracks. You'll notice that there's less legroom available. This model has the power moonroof, so we have a really big bump right here just in front of the rear passengers' heads. And that's especially going to be noticeable if you sit in the middle here, where my hair is definitely brushing if I simply lean forward like that. So definitely feels very in the way for taller folks those 6 feet tall or so or taller. We have flip up rear seat backs. Down here we have a subwoofer on that side. The seat bottom cushions flip up to reveal either storage or a subwoofer on the driver's side, depending on your trim, and a somewhat larger storage cubby over here on the passenger side. One nice touch is that it is removable. You simply remove those screws and you can pull that entire thing out. On the child seat front, the center shoulder belt and buckle are really centrally located. That's a nice touch, but the latch anchors are a little unusual. They're hidden behind these little flaps, so no doors, no Velcro, no sections to pull out or anything like that. You just have to sort of fish through that and actually insert the anchor. On some of the larger anchors out there, that does mean you may get some puckering over time if you have those child seats or bulky anchors connected for any length of time. Child seats with slim anchors are probably not going to be a problem, but with these bulkier fixed latch anchors, it does mean you have to kind of pry on each side and then wiggle around in there a little bit with your finger in there to actually get it attached. The top tether situation is also a little bit different, because rather than having the loops like we find in so many pickup trucks, we have anchors right there behind the rear seat back. So you do have to kind of tilt the seat forward, fish around back there with that latch anchor, pull the tether up, put the seat back, and then yank on it from the front. Now let's see if there's room for an adult up front. I have this Kleck infant seat installed, and I have the appropriate clearance between the seat and the front passenger seat. Let's see how this works. And the answer is, it's definitely doable. On the driver's side, it might be just a little bit trickier, but I think you probably could fit 2 adults up front and maybe some of those infant seats in the rear. Those larger convertible seats, though, that would be a bit tricky. On the inside, we find some modest changes for 2025. Nothing really changes up here on the ceiling. We still have a sunglass holder there, button for that power moonroof. It's a pretty standard size moonroof, just over the driver and front passengers' heads. But as I said, it does have that pretty big bump that you can see from this angle for the rear passengers' heads. There's again that child seat back there, and as you can see, we still have some clearance for that front passenger there. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable head restraints for the front passenger and the driver. PRO-4X logo embroidered there on the seat, and some contrasting stitching, and this interesting touch with the contrasting color inside the perforations for that seat. These are not ventilated seats, they are just heated, but they are perforated to give you just a little bit of extra ventilation on a hot, sweaty day. Definitely important because this interior is basically all black with a few orange accents. Lots of hard plastics going on the front doors, as you'd expect, but we do have a soft insert right there around that midsection of the door in this trim, and a soft touch armrest, which is actually quite comfortable. There's also a bottle holder down there at the bottom of the door. We have the optional Fender audio system in this model. You can see we have Frontier PRO-4X embroidered on those front floor mats as well. Moving over to the dashboard, more contrasting stitching, a soft insert here. It's not the softest, it's just sort of a little coating on top of that hard plastic. Hard plastic down here for the glove compartment. Opens to reveal a bin-style compartment. You were barely able maybe to fit a 9-inch tablet in there. My 11-inch tablet would not fit in there, however. But speaking of big tablets, the big change is this big screen in the dashboard, which is not standard. It is optional, but it's really appreciated because it's really quite a bit bigger than the old one, and it really makes this interior feel shockingly modern compared to just a year ago when the screen wasn't available. Obviously, it supports CarPlay and Android Auto, but it also supports wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. And we have the 360-degree camera system in the vehicle. Although the camera views do seem a little bit old school, just a little bit grainy, I kind of wish they'd upgraded that and maybe decided to use more of the screen for that particular mode. But I really suspect that most people are probably just going to be using smartphone projection most of the time. There's a bit of a storage bin up here with a rubber mat that is removable so that we can keep your things from wandering around on you. Down below that screen, we have some physical buttons and knobs still. That's a welcome touch. Big Frontier logo in the matching orange right there below that screen. On this side, we find a button to disable the auto start-stop system, the engine start-stop button there, electronic controls for the four-wheel drive system right there, 2-zone automatic climate control, pretty typical Nissan switchgear here. 12-volt power port over there on that side, a button to disable the parking sensors. That would, of course, be rear parking sensors because we don't have front parking sensors in the Frontier. We have a USB-A and USB-C port interface there. You have the choice of wireless or wired CarPlay. Heated steering wheel button over there, and toggles for the heated seats. If you live in a cold climate, you might really appreciate that because this means the heated seats are going to stay on through power cycles. We have a storage bin here. It's not a wireless charging mat. That would be located right back there in that area, and it does work with larger smartphones and, of course, thicker cases. 2 big cup holders over there, pretty traditional shifter. We have a soft touch armrest in the middle and a somewhat small storage area there right behind. You can see that this particular model has an MSRP of $50,245. So definitely a deal on the lower end Frontiers, but some of the upper end models are going to get pricey. Again, though, keep in mind that about $4,000 off many models at Nissan dealer lots. Over here, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster, so analog speedometer and tachometer, everything else is right there in the center. And then we find a very similar steering wheel to other Nissan truck and SUV models. This is not the most attractive one to my eye. It feels a little bit dated, but it still works. The toggles on the steering wheel control the infotainment system there in the center. We have a source button, forward, backward there. That's track forward, backward, volume up, down, voice command. And then over here, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control system. To the left of the steering wheel, we find some extra buttons over here, including controls for the cargo lamp. We find the inverter output toggle there, the locker for the rear differential, but as I said, no trailer brake controller. All right, it's time to get the Frontier out on the road. In our testing, obviously without a trailer on the back, we ran 0 to 60 in this model in 7.5 seconds. That's quite similar to the Toyota Tacoma, although it depends on the model of Tacoma we're talking about. And some versions of the Tacoma will be quicker 0 to 60 than this model. Of course, we have two different power outputs on that Tacoma 2.4-liter turbo, and we have the available hybrid system. But the hybrid system, even though it increases the horsepower numbers, it doesn't really have a huge impact on towing capability or indeed 0 to 60 times, and only a modest improvement on fuel economy. I would probably just stick with the base engine. As you've probably noticed in this video, we're talking a lot about the Tacoma, and that's of course because it's the elephant in the room, it's the best selling, it's the closest competitor here. That's why there's so much Tacoma talk. In our 60 to 0 braking test, it took 128 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 back to a complete stop. That's definitely shorter than a Tacoma TRD Pro, and actually most of the Tacomas we were able to test, possibly because these are not the most aggressive all-terrain tires on this model. But more importantly, right now I have 5,000 pounds behind me. So that trailer has a bunch of lumber in it because we're working on a construction project at home. And on this downhill slope where a Tacoma absolutely cannot control this weight, I can not only control it, I can slow down. So I can enter second gear. We have 9 gears and the ratio spread is pretty close together at the low end. It's really, really good for towing because there's a gear for slowing down on steep grades like this. There's also a gear for helping you get up those steeper grades, even though we don't have quite as much torque as some of those turbo options. Turbochargers are definitely replacements for displacements in a lot of areas, most notably acceleration and fuel economy. However, when it comes to engine braking with a gasoline engine, there truly is no replacement for displacement yet. And this is really the defining characteristic about the Frontier. It is this V6 engine. It has a really great sound to it. The power is really linear, so whether you like that or not, that's up to you, but I kind of like very linear power delivery. I also kind of like some turbo boost, but I think if I had to choose when towing a trailer, I prefer this. Nissan says they've also made some further refinements to the engine and transmission for 2025. They weren't too specific about exactly what they were, and it doesn't change the horsepower or the peak torque, but it does seem to have a slightly positive benefit on acceleration. This was just a little bit quicker than a 2024 model that I was able to get from a local dealer. So definitely improvements there and refinements in the process. But the transmission, it's a real asset here because the feel is great. The shifts are quick, whether we're talking about accelerating or downshifting like this if you need to get that engine braking going yet again. You'll really notice that aggressive first gear when you're towing a trailer. And of course, the fact that it's two-wheel drive, it's in the two-wheel drive mode right here. You really have a lot more get up and go in this because of that aggressive first gear than in a lot of the competition. So from a towing feel perspective, this is really good and really well paired, or really well mated, I should say, against the 8-speed ZF transmission that we find in the Gladiator or the 8-speed isane that we find in the Tacoma. On the handling front, there's not too much to say. It's a pretty typical truck setup where we have an independent front suspension, live axle back there in the rear, just like every other entry except for the Honda Ridgeline. Handling, I'm going to give it a B+ here because it's a small truck. What do you expect? It's not an SUV. Now this is the PRO-4X, so we do have different dampers here, and we find some other adjustments to the suspension here and there, but we don't find different roll bars, and they haven't changed the architecture of the suspension at all. So you could swap these parts into a regular Frontier if you wanted to. It has the exact same frame, exact same mounting points. So really, all Frontier models are going to drive pretty much like every other truck. The exceptions in this segment would be some of the extreme performance vehicles like the Raptor. I think that does have a fantastic ride, oddly enough. The Gladiator also has a really well done suspension, mainly due to its more off-road oriented mission. And then of course we have the adaptive dampers available in the Tacoma, which are an interesting twist, but those aren't mainline models. We're talking about, core competitors here. This is quite similar. Out on a gravel road surface like the one that we're on here, I definitely wish we had full-time four-wheel drive, like you will find in certain versions of the Toyota Tacoma, but not all of them. That's relatively unique because aside from the Honda Ridgeline, that's the only other option with that particular feature. And it really does make towing on gravel roads like this a lot nicer. As far as ride quality goes, I'm going to give this a B+. It rides very much like every other half-ton truck except for the Ridgeline. That's of course because the Ridgeline is basically a Honda Pilot with the back cut off of it. It has a fully independent suspension. It's really more crossover than truck in terms of the way that it feels out on the road, but it's still a pickup truck and it's still in this segment. The reason I haven't been talking too much about the Ridgeline in this video is that it's not quite the same thing as the other options, especially if you're looking at higher towing capabilities, more payload, etc. You will find a very different experience, especially when towing in a body-on-frame truck versus a unibody truck like the Ridgeline. Which truck is right for you is really going to come down to the kinds of things you expect your truck to do, and if you want full-size truck feel, full-size truck capability scaled down a little bit, that is what we find here in the Frontier and the Tacoma, the Colorado, the Ranger, the Gladiator, etc. The Ridgeline, it's a bit different. It's a blend of truck capability with functionality from the previous generation Honda Pilot. We don't know when we're going to get a next generation Ridgeline, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was Honda's push to try and add more of this kind of capability into that format of vehicle. We just don't find it yet, mind you. As I've said in previous videos, remember that the road that we test on was recently repaved, so don't put these scores against some of the other scores that we've had in the past. This one measured 65 decibels in the cabin. As often happens, roads get louder over time, then eventually they get repaved. That's just something we have to live with because we do our noise testing on regular road surfaces. Unfortunately, I don't have any other kind of facility to do that in, so bear that in mind when comparing cabin noise scores across the years. Fuel economy, it could be a little bit better, but to be honest, the higher fuel economy scores we find from the EPA in most of the competition don't necessarily translate into better fuel economy in the real world. I've been averaging 19.2 miles per gallon in this model. That's pretty close to pretty much every other option out there. If you treat the Toyota hybrid very, very gently, you can get slightly better fuel economy in that model. We have constant rumors about a Gladiator plug-in hybrid coming at some point in the future, but it doesn't exist yet. So in this segment, if you want better fuel economy, you basically have the Tacoma. And if you're willing to sacrifice size and capability, you could get yourself a Maverick hybrid and get truly fantastic fuel economy. It's just not a mid-size truck. It's not exactly really compact either, but it's certainly not this size of truck. If I were shopping for a truck in this segment today, the Frontier would definitely be on my list, and it would be close to the top. I'm not sure if it would be at the top of the list, but again, pretty close. I love the twin-turbo V6 that we find in the Ranger. Well, the twin-turbo V6s that we find in the Ranger. That 10-speed transmission also is a really great pairing to that engine. Neither of those engines are going to give you the kind of engine braking we find here, but they are going to give you more torque and more power as well. Long-term reliability is anybody's guess right now, but this engine is more mechanically simple because it doesn't have those twin turbos on it. I also think that Nissan did a really good job programming the engine and transmission for daily driving and for towing. It's a really good fit for this segment. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And of course, let's roll through the pricing and comparisons to get even further into the weeds.
Pricing is definitely a strong selling point for the Frontier, not just the relatively low MSRP, but the reality that you're going to find pretty deep discounts on that Nissan dealer lot. Actually, discounts that are comparable or even may exceed some of the discounts we find on the American options, which are pretty aggressive as well. Definitely deeper discounts than you'll find on the Ridgeline, even though Ridgeline sales have really been slipping lately, and of course definitely versus the new Toyota Tacoma, which definitely seems to sell a lot closer to MSRP. With that in mind, let's dive into the Toyota Tacoma. Like the Frontier, the Tacoma is available with different cabs and of course different beds available as well, and that really separates these from some of the other options that we'll be talking about here. The big thing to know with the Tacoma, of course, is it has a turbocharged engine, and not everybody is a fan of that. The second thing to know is that the base model does not get 300 horsepower, or even the 278 horsepower we find in the other models. It gets 228 because it has a detuned version of that 2.4-liter turbo. You have to step up into the next trim up to get either 270 or 278 horsepower, depending on the transmission option you choose. And then if you want the hybrid system, you're going to have to work your way up to the upper end trims, which are definitely going to be more expensive than the average Frontier. That will get you 326 horsepower, a whopping 465 pound-feet of torque. But that may prove useful in off-road situations, it is not as useful as it would look in towing or hauling situations, especially on longer, steep mountain grades. It doesn't take too long in my neck of the woods to run out of the small amount of battery assist that you get, and at that point you're left with just what the turbocharged engine will provide. 278 horsepower, a still pretty healthy amount of torque, but not as much useful torque and useful horsepower as you find in some of the competition, and you're still lugging around that battery pack and the electric motor. So keep that part in mind. When you're off-roading and you're doing those low-speed crawl situations, you get that extra torque, you get that extra help, But in those uphill kind of hill climbing situations, a more powerful engine is still going to be more useful for you. Now, the Tacoma, of course, has the reliability and the dependability reputation that you've come to expect from Toyota, but actually the Frontier has done really well there over time, and a lot of people really seem to prefer the naturally aspirated V6 style and the hope of longer-term reliability and dependability without a smaller displacement turbocharged engine. So if that's you, I would probably go for the Frontier. I would also have to point out that like for like, you're going to get a simply better deal on the Frontier than on the Tacoma, and how much maintenance, how much repair work is going to need to be done on your Frontier over its lifetime with you, I would be willing to bet you're still going to be upside on the Frontier, even if it was less reliable than the Toyota. You just have to accept that that might be some sort of possibility there. Next up, we have the Colorado and the Canyon. We're going to talk about both of them here, but we're going to focus mostly on the Colorado because it is the better seller. The interesting twist with the Colorado is that it gets a lot of power and torque out of its engine. And that's because they basically just borrowed the big 2.7-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine from the Silverado and Sierra and just stuffed it almost unchanged under the hood of the Colorado and Canyon. So 310 horsepower, a whopping 430 pound-feet of torque. That engine produces as much torque and almost as low RPMs as we find in the Ranger Raptor. It's a really powerful, really nice engine for towing. If you're looking at a turbo option in this segment for towing and you don't need that extra ability to kind of control the load going downhill, bearing in mind that there's not a huge amount of difference between a 2.7-liter turbo and these naturally aspirated V6s in terms of engine braking, it's going to be a really solid option because you just have a lot of pull out of that engine. We also have really great discounts, big, huge screens on the interior, pretty roomy interior as well. But I do think that the Colorado and Canyon look a little too monochromatic for me. I think the interior style in the Frontier, it's a little bit older school and the screens are a bit smaller, but I think it's a bit friendlier of a place to spend your time. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. I think that GM really knocked it out of the park in terms of the design of the pieces and parts and shapes in the interior, especially those big screens. But the color palette, really monochromatic unless you go for certain select trims and certain package options in that model. Really good deal though. The Gladiator, that is an interesting twist. Not as good of a deal. You have to really want the off-road option in this segment. You have to really want the Wrangler with a pickup truck bed because that's basically what the Gladiator is. Yes, they changed the front end a bit. It has a blend of Ram 1500 suspension components, etc., and a unique frame, but it's basically Wrangler with a bed. The top comes off, the doors come off, the windshield folds down, etc. It's the only one in the segment like that. I kind of wish someone else tried this, but as a result of all of that, it's one of the more expensive options. Now, it doesn't end quite as high as some because it only goes up to about $64,537. Tacoma actually becomes more expensive in its top trim than the Gladiator, which really is saying something. But the average Gladiator is going to be more expensive than the average practically everything else. Now, on the other hand, there are always screaming deals on the Gladiator because I think it's not selling quite as well as Jeep would like. It's not unusual to get $5,000 or $6,000 off the MSRP of a Gladiator. Even without asking, it's pretty normal for just $2,000 to be advertised everywhere, just right off the hood. So you can definitely get some cash on the hood there. Unfortunately, it's not going to be as efficient. It's not going to be as swift. It's not going to be a lot of things on road that some of these others are because of that off-road mission. It does have a naturally aspirated V6 and it has an excellent 8-speed automatic transmission. But by its nature, the Gladiator is not as aerodynamic. It's a little bit heavier than some of these other options, etc. So certainly keep all of those downsides in mind. There's a toll to be paid for the off-road capability we find in the Gladiator, things like the locking front differential that is really uncommon in this segment. But you're going to have to pay the piper, well, pay the fuel pump basically there. Next up, we have the Ford Ranger, which really surprised me in this generation as a surprisingly good deal. Again, discounts because it's one of the American options, but we also have a really solid engine lineup. 3 different engines to choose from, all turbocharged, of course, but all pretty powerful. If you want over 400 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque in your mid-sized truck, you want a Raptor because that's the only way you can get it. 405 horsepower, 430 pound-feet, mated to a really great automatic transmission as well. Long-term reliability, that's a bit tricky because we have heard some complaints about that transmission specifically, But the Ranger, I think, makes up for it in terms of practicality, performance. It actually is really strangely great on-road, especially that Raptor version, just because of the suspension design. I'm kind of surprised we don't find a Lobo version of the Raptor yet that basically takes the Raptor bits, lowers it down, puts some street tires on. That would be a weird and interesting thing. The other thing to remember with the Raptor, and well, not just the Raptor, the Ranger lineup period, is that because it sells pretty well in Australia, and because the Australians love modifying their vehicles for off-road duty, there are a ton of off-road accessories and different packages available worldwide for the Ranger. So you can really mod your Ranger up way further than most of these other alternatives, perhaps except the Tacoma, because of just the number of options that are available out there. Next up, we have the Honda Ridgeline, kind of the unloved one in this segment lately. Sales have really been dropping, and I think that's a shame, because I've always said that the Ridgeline, I want to confuse these in my head, the Ridgeline is 99% of the truck that 95% of shoppers actually need, but judging by the sales, only about 10% of what they really want. And that's because the Ridgeline does really well for everything that it was designed to do, be an on-road daily driver, haul 5,000 pounds in a trailer, haul about 1,500 pounds in the bed with people inside, of course. It does all of that really well. But if you want to go rugged off-roading, if you want to tow heavier trailers, etc., obviously it's not going to be the right option for you. The car-like design, it is a unibody truck, no matter what Honda might try and sell you, it is still a unibody truck, means it is really comfortable inside. The ride is nice. The handling is good. It's the only torque vectoring option in this segment. It's roomy. It's got a big back seat, big front seat, etc., and the fuel economy is very solid as well. There are just those downsides to ruggedness, durability, I guess you'd say. If you're doing those 5,000 pounds of towing all the time, I probably would choose something else in this segment. But for a daily commuter with pickup truck-like practicality, the Ridgeline's fantastic. When is it going to get redesigned to look more like the Pilot, more like the Passport? We don't know, but it's probably going to be pretty soon. So you might find an even better deal maybe in about a year on a Ridgeline if you can wait. Bottom line for the Frontier at the moment, it's a solid deal. And again, if you're looking for a naturally aspirated engine with a lot of power, especially in a lower-end base truck, Frontier is obviously a really great place to go. And I have to admit, it's really attractive in that light. If I were shopping in this segment, I would probably be looking more at a utility truck, not more of a daily driver. If I were looking for a daily driver, I probably would go to something like a Ridgeline. But if I were looking for a utility truck, especially a fleet purpose vehicle, if you're a small company and you want some trucks to haul some things around, I would absolutely get the Frontier, especially in the lower end trims with the long bed. It's a really practical vehicle. And importantly, the price tag is right as well. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. What would you pick? Or are you waiting for something like a refreshed Ridgeline? The writing is already on the wall. Don't expect things in the Ridgeline to go too different than in the Passport. So probably about 5,000 pounds of towing capability still, the more refined all-wheel drive system, V6 engine, etc., newer interior, bigger square, or whatever, but don't expect it to suddenly grow a frame, suddenly become rear-wheel drive, etc. Let me know what you think about all that as well down there, and I'll see all of you next week.